When I got home from my business trip, I had no idea that everything I thought I knew would shatter in seconds. The driveway was empty, a bad omen. I missed it first. It wasn't until I got out of the car and noticed the new lock on the front door that my heart started pounding. My key didn't fit, of course. I jiggled it, then shoved it in harder, but it was no use. What the hell was going on? I was tired from the trip, not thinking straight. So I went around to the back door, hoping it hadn't been changed. It was locked, too. I leaned against it, feeling the unease settle into a sick pit in my stomach. It wasn't until I saw the police car pull up that I realized how serious things were. A cop and Linda stepped out. Linda looked like a different person, hardened, distant. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. She walked straight up to the porch, dropped a couple of bags at my feet, and said, "This is all that S left, Mark. All that S left?" My mind was racing, not fully processing what she meant, until I looked down at the bags. They were filled with my clothes, hastily stuffed in, wrinkled and dirty. My shirts were all crumpled together, and I could see the faded label of one of my favorite band tees poking out of the mess. She kicked the bags toward me, a contemptuous smile on her face. The police officer just stood there, silent and cold. I stared at her, trying to wrap my head around what was happening. "What is this?" I finally managed to ask, my voice sounding hollow. "What does it look like?" she replied. "I am done, Mark. It's over." "You are done?" I repeated, my voice getting louder. "Over? What the fuck does that mean, Linda?" "It means," she said, looking at me like I was some idiot who couldn't grasp the simplest of things, "I've changed the locks, I've emptied the accounts, and there is a restraining order against you." My heart felt like it stopped for a moment. A restraining order? For what? "For being an asshole," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "And for making threats. You're not welcome here anymore." The cop shifted his weight slightly, as if preparing for something. I saw Linda look at him with a smirk, like she had everything under control. I didn't even have time to process the full meaning of her words before I reacted. The rage that had been simmering ever since I saw the new lock on the door exploded. I shoved past her, knocking her aside. She stumbled but didn't fall, glaring at me as if she expected this. "I think I'll take my gun too," I snarled, my voice rough and raw, "because I still need to shoot your lover S-balls off." Her face paled, and for a split second, I saw fear flash in her eyes. But it was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that cold, calculating look she'd worn ever since she got out of that car. The officer stepped between us, his hand on his holster. "Mr. Johnson, don't make this harder on yourself. Step back and calm down." "Calm down?" I barked a laugh, harsh and ugly. Calm down after what she's done? Linda crossed her arms and looked away, clearly unbothered by my outburst. It was like she was already done with me, had moved on to another life where I didn't exist. And in that moment, I realized that exactly what she'd done. The cop's hand stayed on his holster as he watched me closely, but I didn't care anymore. My mind was spinning with everything that had just been dumped on me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the anger kept bubbling up, threatening to spill over. "You really think you can just kick me out of my own house, Linda?" I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. "You think you can get rid of me like this?" She didn't answer. Instead, she just stood there, calm and collected, like she'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her head. The silence between us was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the cop's radio. I looked down at the bag she'd so callously kicked toward me. It wasn't just the clothes. I could see a few other items mixed in: my old baseball glove, a couple of books, even my watch, which was now scratched from the way it had been tossed in. These were things I'd accumulated over years of living together, things that had once held memories, now reduced to trash in a few hastily packed bags. "That's all that S left of us, huh?" I muttered, more to myself than to her. Finally, she spoke. "You knew this was coming, Mark. Don't act like you didn't see the signs." "Signs?" I repeated, my voice rising again. "What signs, Linda? The way you started staying out late? The secret phone calls? The cold shoulder every time I tried to talk to you?" She rolled her eyes, exasperated. You never wanted to see it. You were too busy with your own life, your own priorities. I needed more, Mark. I needed someone who actually gave a damn. Someone who gave a damn? I scoffed. And you think this lover of yours is that person? You think he's going to stick around after all this? He's not like you, she snapped, her voice full of venom. He cares about me, listens to me. He's there for me in a way you never were. I felt something break inside me at her words. It wasn't just the betrayal, but the realization that she'd already replaced me in her mind, that I was just a memory she was eager to erase. All those years together, the life we'd built, meant nothing to her now. The cop finally spoke up, his voice firm but not unkind. Mr. Johnson, I think it is best if you leave. We don't want this to escalate any further. I stared at him, then back at Linda. You really think you're going to get away with this, don't you? You think this is the end? This is the end, Mark, she said, her tone final. I've moved on. You should too. Moved on? I echoed, almost laughing at the absurdity of it all. To what? A life where you get to pretend I never existed. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to the cop, as if to signal that she was done with this conversation. The cop took a step closer to me, and I could see he was ready to act if I pushed things any further. But I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. I wasn't going to be the guy who got dragged out of his own home in handcuffs. So I picked up the bags, feeling the weight of them pulling me down, and turned to leave. As I walked away, I heard Linda S.'s voice one last time, cold and detached. I'll have the papers sent over by the end of the week. I didn't respond. What was there to say? She'd already made her decision. All that was left now was for me to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of everything. The bags were in the back seat, a mocking reminder of how my life had been reduced to a pile of clothes and a few trinkets. I could feel my hands trembling on the wheel, the anger and betrayal coursing through me like a poison I couldn't purge. Finally, I pulled into the parking lot of a small, dingy motel on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was all I could afford now that Linda had cleaned out our accounts. I checked in, the woman at the front desk barely glancing at me as she handed over the key. Room 204. Just another number, just another faceless guest. The room was as depressing as I'd expected, peeling wallpaper, a lumpy bed, a TV that looked like it hadn't worked in years. But it was a place to crash, and right now, that was all I needed. I tossed the bags on the floor and collapsed on the bed, staring up at the stained ceiling. How had it come to this? Just a few days ago, I was living a normal life, oblivious to the storm that was brewing right under my nose. I thought back to the last few months, trying to pinpoint the moment when everything started to unravel. But all I could see were the little things I'd ignored, the late-night phone calls, the distant looks, the nights she claimed to be working late. I'd chalked it up to stress, to the routine pressures of marriage. But now I realized those were the cracks in the foundation, the warning signs I'd missed. I reached for my phone, scrolling through the contacts until I found the one person I could call, Jason. My best friend since college, the guy who'd been through it all with me, the good, the bad, and the ugly. If anyone could help me make sense of this mess, it was him. Jason, it's me, I said when he picked up. My voice sounded hollow, even to me. Mark? What is going on? You sound like shit. Linda, she's gone, man. She kicked me out, emptied the accounts, changed the locks, everything. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Jesus Christ, Mark, are you serious? As a heart attack, I replied, my voice cracking. She's with someone else, Jason. She's been cheating on me, and now she's done. It's all over. Fuck, man, I don't even know what to say. Where are you now? At some crappy motel on the edge of town. I didn't know where else to go. Stay there. I'm coming over. I hung up and threw the phone onto the bed, staring at the ceiling again. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in on me. I needed air. I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside, the cool night breeze hitting me like a slap in the face. It was dark, the kind of night that made you feel like the world was swallowing you whole. I lit a cigarette, something I hadn't done in years. Linda hated smoking, but right now, I didn't give a damn. I took a long drag, feeling the smoke fill my lungs, the burn in my throat a welcome distraction from the chaos in my mind. As I stood there, the reality of my situation started to sink in. Linda was gone. My life as I knew it was over. Everything ID worked for, everything ID built, had been ripped away from me in a matter of hours. And now, all I had left was the bitter taste of betrayal and a whole lot of uncertainty about what came next. But as I finished the cigarette and flicked the butt into the parking lot, something inside me shifted. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. She thought she could just erase me from her life, take everything I had, and move on like I never existed? Not a chance. I went back inside, my mind racing with plans. I wasn't going to sit back and take this. If Linda wanted a war, then that's exactly what she was going to get. Jason showed up about 20 minutes later, looking as worried as I felt. He didn't say much when he walked in, just gave me a long, hard look before pulling me into a rough hug. "I can't believe this, man," he muttered. "This is fucking insane." "Tell me about it," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He let go and sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. "So what's the plan? You can just let her do this to you?" I nodded, the anger starting to bubble up again. I am going to fight back, Jason. She thinks she can just walk all over me, but she's got another thing coming." "Damn right," he agreed, "but you need to be smart about this. You can just go in guns blazing. She has already got the upper hand with that restraining order." "Yeah, I know," I said, pacing the small room. "But there's gotta be something I can do. Some way to turn the tables on her." Jason thought for a moment, then looked up at me with a determined expression. "First thing is first, you need to get a lawyer. A good one. Someone who knows how to deal with this kind of shit." I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope. "Yeah, you were right. I'll do that first thing tomorrow. And in the meantime, you stay here. Don't to go anywhere near her or the house. You need to play this smart, Mark." I knew he was right, but it didn't make it any easier. The thought of Linda lying in our bed with that bastard living in our house made my blood boil. But I couldn't afford to screw this up. I had to be careful, calculated. "Thanks, man," I said, finally sitting down beside him. "I don't know what I'd do without you." "Don't mention it," he replied, clapping me on the back. "We'll get through this. We'll figure it out." We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of everything hanging heavy in the air. But in that silence, a resolve began to form. I wasn't going to let Linda win. I wasn't going to let her destroy me. The battle was just beginning. The next morning, I woke up to the gray light of dawn seeping through the thin curtains. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was, and then it hit me like a ton of bricks. The motel room, the bags of my belongings scattered on the floor, the empty space next to me where Linda used to be. It all came rushing back. I rolled out of bed, feeling the ache in my back from the lumpy mattress. There was no time to wallow. I needed to take action. Jason was still asleep on the chair, his feet propped up on the bed, a half-empty bottle of whiskey by his side. I hadn't even noticed when he'd fallen asleep, but I was grateful he'd stayed. I wasn't sure I could have made it through the night alone. Quietly, I grabbed my phone and started searching for lawyers in the area. I wasn't looking for just any lawyer. I needed someone ruthless, someone who could help me tear Linda's plans apart. After sifting through reviews and websites, one name kept coming up: Michael Green. He was known for being a pit bull in the courtroom, the kind of lawyer you only hired if you were ready to go to war. I dialed the number and was surprised when a voice answered on the second ring. "Michael Green's office. How can I help you? I need to speak with Mr. Green." "It's urgent," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. The receptionist paused, then said, "Mr. Green has an opening this morning at 9:00 a.m. Can you make it?" "I will be there," I replied, not missing a beat. I hung up and nudged Jason awake. "Hey, I've got an appointment with a lawyer. You want to come with me?" He groaned and stretched, blinking blearily at me. "Damn, man, you don't waste any time, do you?" "I can't afford to," I said, my tone more serious than I intended. "I need to hit back, and I need to do it fast." Jason nodded, rubbing his eyes. "All right, let's get going. We'll grab some coffee on the way." We left the motel in silence, the morning air cold and crisp. My mind was racing with possibilities, scenarios of how this could all play out. But underneath it all, There was a simmering rage, a burning desire to make Linda pay for what she'd done to me. The law office was in a sleek building downtown, all glass and steel. We rode the elevator up in silence, the tension between us almost palpable. When we stepped out, the receptionist greeted us and led us into a large office with a panoramic view of the city. Michael Green was already seated behind his desk, a tall, imposing man in his late 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor. He stood up and shook my hand, his grip firm, his eyes sharp. "Mr. Johnson, I understand you're in a bit of a situation," he said, gesturing for me to sit down. Jason took a seat beside me, his presence a steadying force. "You could say that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "My wife, she has turned my life upside down. She's been cheating on me, and now she has kicked me out, emptied our accounts, and gotten a restraining order against me. I need help, Mr. Green. I need to fight back." Michael leaned back in his chair, studying me with a shrewd gaze. "This isn't uncommon, unfortunately, but you are smart to come to me. We'll need to move quickly to secure your position and make sure you don't get railroaded." He pulled out a legal pad and started jotting down notes. "First, we'll file a motion to contest the restraining order. We'll argue that it was obtained under false pretenses and that it is part of a larger strategy to deprive you of your rights. I'll also petition the court to freeze your joint accounts and demand a full accounting of the funds. If she has spent any of it, we'll make sure she has held accountable." "Can we get the locks on the house changed back?" I asked, the frustration seeping into my voice. "I want my home back." Michael nodded. "We'll file for temporary possession of the marital home. If we can prove that she acted in bad faith, there's a good chance the judge will grant it. But I'll be honest with you, Mark, this isn't going to be easy. She has played her cards well, and we'll need to be strategic." Jason chimed in, his voice low and serious. "Mark isn't just looking to win a settlement. He wants to send a message. Linda thinks she can walk all over him, and she needs to learn that she can tee." Michael's eyes glinted with something like approval. "I like your attitude, Mr. Johnson. It's going to take that kind of resolve to get through this." We spent the next hour going over the details, my assets, the timeline of events, and the evidence I had. Michael was thorough, methodical, asking questions that forced me to think about things I hadn't considered. By the time we were done, I felt like I finally had a plan, a way to fight back against the injustice that had been done to me. As we were wrapping up, Michael gave me one last piece of advice. "Mark, this is going to get ugly. There is a good chance Linda will try to escalate things, especially once she realizes you are fighting back. You need to be prepared for that. Keep your head on straight, and don't let your emotions get the best of you. We'll get through this, but only if you stay focused." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of determination and dread. This wasn't going to be just a legal battle, it was going to be a war, one that would test every ounce of strength I had left. But I was ready. Linda had underestimated me, and she was about to find out just how big of a mistake that was. As Jason and I left the office, the sun was just starting to break through the clouds, casting a pale light over the city. It felt like a new beginning, like the first step on a long road to reclaiming my life. "We're going to get through this," Jason said, clapping me on the back as we walked to the car. "And when we do, you'll come out stronger on the other side." I nodded, a grim smile forming on my lips. "You are damn right we will." But deep down I knew the hardest part was still to come. The fight wasn't just about getting my home or my money back. It was about reclaiming my dignity, my pride, and my sense of self. And I wasn't going to stop until I'd gotten it all back, no matter what it took. The next few days were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and tense phone calls with Michael Green. He worked fast, filing motions and sending notices to Linda's lawyer. Every step felt like a small victory, but I knew it was just the beginning. I barely slept, running on adrenaline and anger. The motel room became my base of operations, the walls closing in on me more and more each day. Linda hadn't contacted me, not even a text. It was like she'd erased me from her life entirely. That only fueled my determination. I wasn't going to let her win this one-sided war. I couldn't tee. On the third day, I got a call from Michael. "Mark, I've got some good news," he said, his voice calm but with a hint of satisfaction. The judge granted our motion to contest the restraining order. We've got a hearing scheduled for next week. It's our chance to set the record straight. That's great news, I replied, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time since this nightmare began. Listen, Michael continued, his tone turning serious. We need to be prepared. Linda S. lawyer will try to paint you as unstable, so it is crucial that you keep your cool in court. Stick to the facts, Dante get emotional, and let me handle the rest. I understand, I said, gripping the phone tightly. I 1T let you down. After we hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faded wallpaper. The hearing was my chance to take back some control, to show Linda and the court that I wasn't the monster she was trying to make me out to be. But the thought of facing her, of hearing her lies in person, made my stomach churn. Jason stopped by that evening with a 6-pack of beer and a couple of burgers. We sat in the cramped motel room, eating in silence for a while. He could tell I was wound up, the tension in my body making it hard to relax. You're doing everything you can, Mark, he finally said, breaking the silence. You've got a good lawyer, and you've got a plan. Don T. let her get in your head. I know, I muttered, taking a swig of beer. It's just seeing her in court, knowing she's going to lie through her teeth. It's going to be tough. Jason nodded, his expression grim. Yeah, it will be. But remember, the truth is on your side. She's the one who's been cheating, lying, and manipulating. You just need to stay focused and let Green do his job. Easier said than done, I replied, but I knew he was right. As the days passed, I threw myself into preparing for the hearing. I went over everything with Michael, making sure I knew exactly what to say and how to present myself. Every night, I lay awake in the motel room, going over the scenarios in my head, imagining how it would all play out. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. I dressed carefully, choosing a suit that made me feel confident, even if it was a little tight around the waist. Jason offered to come with me for moral support, but I declined. This was something I needed to face on my own. The courthouse was a stark, imposing building that seemed to loom over me as I walked inside. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and the murmur of hushed conversations. I found Michael waiting in one of the small conference rooms, a stack of papers spread out before him. Ready? He asked, looking up at me with that calm, professional demeanor I was starting to rely on. As ready as I'll ever be, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Good, he said, standing up and gathering the papers. Remember, stick to the facts. Dante let Linda provoke you. This is about showing the judge that you are the reasonable, stable one. We walked into the courtroom together, the air thick with tension. Linda was already there, sitting with her lawyer. She looked different, more polished, more composed than I'd ever seen her. It was like she de-transformed into a completely different person, one who didn't have a care in the world. Seeing her like that, so detached and self-assured, sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me. But I forced myself to stay calm, to remember Michael S.'s advice. This wasn't about letting my emotions get the better of me. This was about showing everyone, especially Linda, that I wasn't going to be pushed around. The hearing began, and Linda S. lawyer started by painting me as the aggressor, someone who had become unhinged and dangerous after discovering the affair. He talked about the restraining order, the alleged threats ID made, and how Linda was fearful for her safety. Every word was a twisted version of the truth, and it took everything in me not to stand up and shout that he was full of shit. When it was Michael S.'s turn, he calmly dismantled their arguments. He brought up the fact that Linda had emptied our accounts and changed the locks without any warning. He questioned the validity of the restraining order, pointing out that Linda had not provided any evidence of these so-called threats. He even hinted at the possibility that Linda S.'s actions were a calculated move to gain the upper hand in an impending divorce. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I took a deep breath and stood up, my hands trembling slightly as I addressed the judge. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady but filled with the weight of everything I'd been through. I've never been anything but a devoted husband. Finding out about my wife S. affair has been the most painful experience of my life, but I would never harm her. All I want is to protect my rights and get some clarity on this situation. I have nothing to hide, and I am here today to fight for what is right." As I spoke, I forced myself to look at Linda. Her expression was unreadable, her eyes cold and distant. It was like she didn't recognize me anymore, or maybe she just didn't care. But I wasn't speaking for her. I was speaking for myself, for the man who'd been blindsided by the woman he thought he knew. When I finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge looked at me for a long moment, then turned to Linda. "Mrs. Johnson," the judge said, his voice firm, "do you have any concrete evidence to support the claims you've made in this restraining order?" Linda's lawyer scrambled to respond, but it was clear they had nothing solid to back up their accusations. The judge's expression hardened. "Given the lack of evidence, I am inclined to side with Mr. Johnson on this matter. The restraining order is hereby lifted, effective immediately." I barely heard the rest of the judge's ruling. The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. I won this battle, but I knew the war was far from over. As we left the courtroom, Michael turned to me, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. That went about as well as we could have hoped. "Yeah," I replied, still processing what had just happened. "Thanks, Michael. I couldn't have done it without you." "This is just the beginning, Mark," he said, his voice serious again. "Now that we've got the restraining order out of the way, we can start focusing on the next steps. Dante, let your guard down." I nodded, knowing he was right. The restraining order was gone, but Linda wasn't done with me yet. I could see it in her eyes as she left the courtroom, her expression tight with anger and frustration. She wasn't going to give up that easily. And neither was I. The fight was far from over, and I was ready to go the distance. Linda had underestimated me once, but I wasn't going to let that happen again. I was ready for whatever came next. With the restraining order lifted, I finally felt like I could breathe again. But the reality of what was coming next kept that relief from fully settling in. As I walked out of the courthouse, the weight of everything still hung heavy on my shoulders. Linda had lost this round, but I knew she wasn't going to back down easily. I decided to head back to the motel to gather my thoughts. But as I drove, a question that had been lurking in the back of my mind finally pushed its way to the forefront. Who was this guy she was willing to burn our entire life down for? I had avoided thinking too much about him, focusing instead on the legal battle. But now, with some of the immediate threats neutralized, the curiosity gnawed at me. I pulled into the parking lot of a coffee shop, needing to clear my head. I ordered a black coffee and found a seat by the window. As I sat there, I started piecing together the fragments of what I knew. I knew Linda had met him at her work, she'd mentioned it in passing, maybe a nurse or a patient, and the guy had somehow wormed his way into her life. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Who the hell was he? How did he manage to turn my wife against me so completely? I was so lost in thought that I didn't notice the woman at the next table was watching me. She was about my age, maybe a bit younger, with dark hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take everything in. "Rough day?" she asked, her voice cutting through my thoughts. I looked up, startled. "You could say that." She smiled sympathetically. "I couldn't help but overhear some of what happened in court. Sounds like you've been through the ringer." "Yeah," I replied, not really in the mood to share, but something about her demeanor made me feel like she understood. "It's been a rough few weeks." "Divorce?" she asked, her tone casual but curious. "Something like that," I said, not wanting to get into details with a stranger, just trying to make sense of it all. She nodded, sipping her coffee. "It's amazing how quickly things can fall apart, isn't it? One day you think you've got everything figured out and the next it's all gone." I glanced at her, wondering how much she really knew. "You sound like you've been through it yourself." She shrugged. "I've seen my share of shit, that's for sure. But I am still here, still standing." There was something about the way she said it, with a mix of bitterness and defiance, that struck a chord with me. I found myself opening up, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "It's just I thought I knew her, you know? We've been together for years. I never saw this coming. And now she's with this guy, some guy I don't even know, but he has got her acting like I'm the enemy." She listened quietly, her expression thoughtful. When I finished, she leaned forward slightly. Have you looked into who he is? I shook my head. I've been so focused on the legal stuff I haven't had the time or energy to dig into that. But now, yeah, I'm starting to think I should. If it were me, she said, her eyes narrowing slightly, I'd want to know who the hell I was up against. Maybe it's time you found out. Her words made something click in my mind. She was right. I'd been so busy playing defense, reacting to Linda S. moves, that I hadn't taken the time to really figure out who this guy was. If I knew more about him, maybe I could turn the tables. Thanks, I said, suddenly feeling a bit more focused. I think I'm going to do just that. She smiled again, this time with a hint of something more a challenge, maybe. Good luck. Don't let them beat you down. As I left the coffee shop, I couldn't shake the feeling that this stranger had just given me the push I needed. I didn't even catch her name, but she'd put something into motion that I couldn't ignore. When I got back to the motel, I started making calls. I needed to know who this guy was, what he did, and why Linda thought he was worth throwing everything away. I called a few mutual acquaintances, and even a private investigator I found online. If Linda was willing to upend our lives for this guy, I needed to understand why. By the next day, I had some basic information. His name was Eric Wallace. He was a physical therapist at the hospital where Linda worked. Apparently, he was well-liked, the kind of guy who got along with everyone. But there was more a rumor about him being involved with other women at the hospital, whispers of affairs that had ended badly. I sat there, absorbing the information, my anger simmering just below the surface. This was the guy she'd chosen? This snake who had a history of ruining lives? My mind raced with possibilities of how I could use this information to my advantage. But just as I was starting to formulate a plan, my phone buzzed with a text from Jason. We need to talk. Something came up. I called him back immediately. What's going on? You're not going to believe this, Jason said, his voice tense. I was at the bar last night, and guess who showed up? Linda and her new boy toy. My grip tightened on the phone. Did they see you? No, I stayed out of sight. But get this, they were arguing. She looked pissed, man. I couldn't hear everything, but I caught bits and pieces. Something about money, and he was trying to calm her down. What the hell? I muttered, trying to piece it together. I don't know what is going on, but it didn't look good, Jason continued. Maybe this guy isn't as perfect as she thought. My mind was reeling. Could it be that things weren't as rosy between Linda and Eric as she wanted everyone to believe? Maybe this was an opportunity, a crack in the armor that I could exploit. Keep an eye on them, I said, my voice hardening with determination. I need to know everything. If they're having problems, I'm going to use it. Jason agreed, and we hung up. As I sat there, the pieces of the puzzle started to come together. Linda had upended my life for this guy, but maybe she was starting to realize that the grass wasn't greener on the other side. And if that was the case, I was going to make damn sure she regretted every single decision she made. The fight was far from over, and now I had a new weapon in my arsenal, her own mistakes. The idea that Linda and Eric might be hitting rough waters consumed me. It was like a lifeline in this sea of chaos, something I could grasp onto, a sign that maybe, just maybe, this nightmare was starting to unravel for them as well. I needed to dig deeper, find out exactly what was going on between them. I couldn't just sit around waiting for updates from Jason or hoping to stumble across information. No, I had to be proactive. If Linda was having second thoughts, if she was regretting her decisions, I needed to be there, ready to use it to my advantage. The next morning, I called the private investigator I'd hired, a no-nonsense guy named Tony, who seemed to have seen it all. I gave him the details I had on Eric and asked him to dig up anything he could find. Affairs, debts, criminal records, I didn't care what it was. I just needed something I could use. Tony assured me he'd get on it right away, and I spent the rest of the day pacing around the motel room, waiting for news. The anxiety gnawed at me, the waiting game nearly unbearable. I knew I was on the brink of something big, but the uncertainty was killing me. Late that afternoon, Tony called back. "Mark, I've got some interesting information for you," he said, his voice low and deliberate. "Turns out your wife's new boyfriend has a bit of a history." "Go on." I urged, my pulse quickening. Eric Wallace has a reputation for getting involved with women who are already in relationships. From what I could dig up, this isn't TKT his first rodeo. He had at least 2 other affairs with married women, both ended badly. One of them ended in divorce, and the other, well, the husband found out and nearly beat Eric to death. After that, Eric transferred to another hospital, which is how he ended up where he is now. Jesus, I muttered, trying to process the information. So this guy is a serial homewrecker. Looks like it, Tony confirmed. But here is the kicker. He has also got a bit of a gambling problem. Lost a lot of money over the last couple of years, and it is starting to catch up with him. He's been borrowing from some shady characters, and from what I've heard, they're not too happy with him right now. A cold, vindictive satisfaction crept over me. This was the kind of dirt I'd been hoping for, something that could bring him down and, by extension, shake Linda's confidence in her choices. That is exactly what I needed to hear, I said, a plan forming in my mind. Can you get me proof of this? Documents, records, anything that ties him to these gambling debts? Already on it, Tony replied. I'll have something for you in the next day or two. Just be careful, Mark. This guy's got nothing to lose, and that makes him dangerous. I will, I assured him before hanging up. I spent the evening going over every possible angle. Linda was stubborn, that much I knew. She wasn't going to back down easily, especially not after everything she had already sacrificed. But if she found out Eric was lying to her, if she realized he was dragging her down with him, maybe she'd start to see things differently. The next day, Tony sent over a file filled with documents, bank statements, loan agreements, even some correspondence between Eric and a couple of very unsavory-looking debt collectors. The guy was in deep, and it was only a matter of time before his whole world came crashing down. Armed with this new information, I knew I needed to confront Linda, but it couldn't be some explosive confrontation. I had to be smart about it, strategic. I needed to plant the seeds of doubt in her mind, let her connect the dots on her own. I decided to show up at our house unannounced. The restraining order was gone, and I had every right to be there. I knew it was risky, but I also knew that catching Linda off guard was my best shot at getting through to her. When I pulled up to the house, my heart pounded in my chest. It felt surreal, standing in front of the place that had once been my home, the place where I built a life with Linda. Now it felt foreign, like I was walking into enemy territory. I rang the doorbell, the sound echoing through the quiet neighborhood. For a moment, I thought she might not answer, but then I heard footsteps approaching. The door swung open, and there she was, Linda, looking more composed than I'd expected, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Surprise? Guilt? I couldn't tell. What are you doing here, Mark? She asked, her voice cool and guarded. I needed to talk to you, I said, stepping forward, forcing her to back up slightly. We both know this isn't over. There are things you need to know. She crossed her arms, trying to maintain her composure. I don't think there's anything left to say. Oh, I think there is, I replied, pulling out the file Tony had given me. You have made some big decisions, Linda, but you've done it without knowing the full story. I'm here to show you who this guy really is. She glanced at the file, her eyes narrowing. What is this? Proof that Eric isn't he who you think he is? I said, my voice steady. He's got a history of affairs, Linda. This isn't the first marriage he's destroyed, and it won't be the last. He is also in deep with some very dangerous people. Gambling debts, loan sharks, he's up to his neck in it. You think you are building a future with him, but all he's going to do is drag you down. Her face drained of color as she took the file from my hands, flipping through the pages. I could see the doubt creeping in, the cracks starting to form in her carefully constructed facade. You are lying, she whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. You're just trying to scare me, to get me to come back to you. No, Linda, I said, my voice softening. I am not lying. I am trying to save you from making the biggest mistake of your life. I loved you, I still do, even after everything. But you were walking into a trap, and you don't even see it. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a mix of anger and fear. Why are you doing this? Because I know you, Linda, I said, taking a step closer. I know you didn't want things to end up like this. I know you thought you were doing the right thing, but you are in over your head. You can still get out, still make things right. but you need to see the truth first." For a long moment she just stood there, the file clutched in her hands, her eyes darting between the papers and my face. I could see the war going on inside her, the battle between pride and reality, between what she wanted to believe and what she knew deep down was true. Finally, she lowered the file, her shoulders slumping slightly. "I need time to think," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "I understand," I said, backing off. "Take the time you need. But don't wait too long, Linda. You might not have much time left before everything falls apart." She didn't say anything else, just nodded slightly before closing the door. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of emotions. There was satisfaction in knowing I'd finally gotten through to her, but there was also an overwhelming sadness. This wasn't how I wanted things to go. This wasn't the life I'd imagined, but I couldn't dwell on that now. The wheels were in motion, and I had to see this through to the end. Linda had to make a choice, and whatever that choice was, it would shape the rest of our lives. I just hoped, for her sake, that she made the right one. The drive back to the motel was quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every thought, every doubt. My mind was racing, replaying the conversation with Linda over and over. I kept questioning myself, wondering if I had done enough, said the right things, or if I'd just driven her deeper into whatever delusion she was living in with Eric. But I knew one thing for certain: I had planted the seeds of doubt. Whether those seeds would grow and change anything, I couldn't say. All I could do was wait. When I got back to the motel, I found Jason sitting in the parking lot, leaning against his car with a grim look on his face. He straightened up when he saw me, his eyes searching mine for some kind of sign. "Well?" he asked, pushing off the car and walking over to me. "How did it go?" I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I think I got through to her. I showed her what kind of guy Eric really is." She looked shaken, but I don't know if it's enough. Jason nodded slowly, his expression still tense. "That is something at least. But you know this guy isn't just going to roll over. He's going to fight to keep her, especially if he knows you're trying to get her back." "I'm not even sure if I want her back, Jason," I admitted, the weight of the realization hitting me as I spoke the words. "Not after everything she's done. I just don't want her to throw her life away on some lowlife who's going to ruin her. But us? I don't know if there's anything left to save." Jason was quiet for a moment, then he clapped me on the back. "You're doing what you have to do, man. Whatever happens, you are handling this better than most people would. But you need to be prepared for what comes next. Eric isn't he going to take this lying down? He might try to make things ugly." I nodded, already thinking about the next steps. "Yeah, I know. I'm going to stay one step ahead of him. I'm done reacting to what they do. It's time to be proactive." We headed up to the motel room, where we spent the next few hours strategizing. We talked about all the possible scenarios, what Linda might do, how Eric might react, and how I could use the information I had to protect myself and, maybe, to protect her. Jason was a good sounding board, helping me think through the angles and keep my emotions in check. By the time we were done, I felt more prepared but also more on edge. This was far from over. The next day, I got a call from Tony. "Mark, I did some more digging, and I found something that might interest you. It turns out Eric has been trying to liquidate some assets fast. He has sold his car, and there are records of him attempting to sell off a few other things. Looks like he is trying to get his hands on cash and quick." "Why would he be doing that?" I asked, though the answer was already forming in my mind. My guess? He is in deeper trouble than we thought. Maybe he's planning to skip town. Maybe he is trying to pay off his debts before someone comes knocking on his door. Either way, it is not a good sign. The news was both a relief and a concern. If Eric was on the brink of running, it meant he was losing control, but it also meant he was desperate. Desperate people did stupid things, and I couldn't afford to underestimate him. "Thanks for the update, Tony," I said. "Keep an eye on him. If he makes any moves, I want to know." After I hung up, I sat there for a long time, trying to figure out my next move. Eric's actions were a ticking time bomb, and Linda was standing too close to the blast radius. If he ran, she'd be left holding the pieces. But if he stayed, who knew what kind of mess he'd drag her into? That afternoon, I decided to pay another visit to Linda. I didn't want to push her too hard, but she needed to know that Eric's situation was getting worse. I couldn't let her be blindsided when things inevitably went south. When I pulled up to the house, I noticed right away that something was off. The driveway was empty, but the front door was slightly ajar. A cold knot formed in my stomach as I walked up the path. I pushed the door open, calling out for Linda. No answer. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I stepped inside, and when I saw it, the living room was in disarray, furniture knocked over, and a lamp shattered on the floor. My heart raced as I scanned the room, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. "Linda?" I called out again, louder this time, but still no response. I walked further into the house, my every nerve on high alert. The place looked like it had been ransacked, like someone had come through in a fit of rage or desperation. The knot in my stomach tightened as I approached the kitchen, the door half open. When I pushed it open, I froze. Linda was sitting at the kitchen table, her face buried in her hands. She was shaking, and I could hear her muffled sobs. "Linda," I said softly, stepping into the room. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. There was a deep cut on her cheek, and a bruise forming around her eye. My blood ran cold as I realized what had happened. "What the hell did he do to you?" I demanded, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and fear. She didn't answer, just looked away, tears streaming down her face. "Linda," I said again, moving closer, but she flinched, pulling back as if expecting another blow. "Did he do this? Did Eric do this to you?" He didn't mean to," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He was just so angry, so scared. He said he didn't want to hurt me, but he just lost control." I felt a surge of fury unlike anything I'd ever felt before. The thought of that bastard laying his hands on her, hurting her like this, made me want to tear him apart. "Where is he now?" I asked, barely keeping my voice under control. "I don't know," she sobbed. "He left. He said he had to go take care of something. He was so angry, Mark. I've never seen him like that." I knelt down beside her, trying to keep my voice calm, though my heart was pounding in my chest. "Linda, you need to get out of here. You're not safe with him. He is dangerous, and he is losing it. You need to come with me." She shook her head, the tears flowing freely now. I've made such a mess of everything. I thought I could help him, that I could fix it, but I've just made everything worse." "You didn't make this mess," I said firmly. "He did. He's the one who's dragging you down, but it's not too late to get out, Linda. You can still walk away." For a moment she looked at me with a glimmer of hope, but then it faded, replaced by a look of despair. "I don't know if I can. I don't know if there's anything left for me to go back to." "There is," I insisted, taking her hand. "But you have to take the first step. Come with me, Linda. Let's get out of here before he comes back." She hesitated, her grip on my hand tightening as she struggled with her decision. I could see the fear in her eyes, the doubt and the guilt, but I could also see the flicker of survival instinct that hadn't been completely snuffed out. Finally, she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, let's go." I helped her to her feet, and we left the house together, the place that had once been our home now nothing more than a shell of what it used to be. As we walked to the car, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting Eric to show up, but the street was empty. For now, we were safe. Once we were on the road, Linda slumped in the passenger seat, exhausted, defeated. I glanced over at her, my heart breaking for the woman who had once been my everything. She'd made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but she didn't deserve this. No one did. I drove back to the motel where Jason was waiting. He took one look at Linda's face and his expression darkened. He didn't ask questions, just helped me get her inside. "Eric did this?" he asked quietly once we were alone. "Yeah," I replied, the anger still burning in my chest. "He is losing it, Jason. We need to do something before he does something even worse." "What's the plan?" Jason asked, his voice steady, but I could see the concern in his eyes. I thought for a moment, trying to figure out the best course of action. "We need to find him. If he's running, we need to know where he's going. If he's staying, we need to make sure he doesn't come near Linda again. I don't care what it takes, I'm going to stop him. Jason nodded, his expression resolute. I am with you.